Hi guys, my name is Jay Black. I'm with the Shane Carballo real estate team at eXp Realty. And joining me today is Rami. He is with Central Coast. All right, remember the name.
Central Coast Bee Removal and Apiaries.
So he has had these apiaries for quite some time, and he removes bees, like live bees from the house. He does live removals so that he saves the bees, and he's able to take them up to his apiaries and then get honey from them as well. And he sells some honey in the area. And so, Rami, why don't you tell us, how you got started with bees?
Okay. Well, I've always been interested in bees since I was a child, and more specifically, I was more interested in honey as a child. All the different types of honey. Always had a sweet tooth, and uh, when I was in my 30s, I believe I decided I wanted to have a hive finally. And I just went out and purchased a hive from a beekeeper. I was driving by, saw a bunch of hives. So I pulled over, asked the beekeeper if I could buy some hives, and bought a hive. And that's how I started out. That was about over 20 years ago, 25 years ago. And I have a business now where I sell honey, but I also use my bees for pollination, and I remove bees from buildings and from walls and other structures. Um, so I do all the removals live. I don't kill the bees, and uh, that's kind of it. It all started out because I worked in construction, and people would call me because there were bees in buildings, and I'd remove them. And I finally decided to start a business after doing that for about 10 years, on and off, the people who were randomly calling.
So you've been doing it for like 20 years. So what surprised you most since you started this 20 years ago?
Well, I guess the what's surprising really is how amazing the bees, how they work together and are able to create these colonies. And the colonies are really interesting because they increase their colonies in two different ways. By having the queen laying like thousands of eggs a day. That's how the hive gets larger. But at some point, the hive gets so large, and there's so much, when there's a lot of nectar out, um, the bees will divide and start a new colony. And they do that quite often. You can have a hive that'll create new queens and split maybe 4 or 5 times in a year.
Wow. Okay. Wow.
So
I
if you
didn't
don't
realize it was
manage
that
your
frequent.
hives, then you're going to have, you won't be able to harvest a lot of honey, because every time there's splits and the bees take off and swarm, then you're losing a lot of your honey and a lot of your worker bees.
Okay.
So it's a very challenging profession. It's a lot more. There's a lot more husbandry involved in beekeeping than I initially thought when I first started.
Okay. Yeah, I think a lot of people have the misconception where you have a hive and you go out, you collect honey, and you're kind of done, like nothing to worry
Right.
about.
It
Okay.
used to be that way in the past, about 20 years ago, but there's so many new diseases and pathogens now that
Mm,
it makes beekeeping a lot more challenging than it used to be.
okay. And when you say if you don't manage your hive, you lose your honey. So what do you mean by manage them? What do you have to do to keep the production up and everything?
Oh, well, you have to go in there and split the hives, or you have to try to keep the bees from creating new queens. And there's different ways of doing that.
Okay.
So you do have to open up the hives occasionally, get in there and work them, and then you have to uh, utilize different methods to keep the pathogens and the diseases down to a minimum, which is quite challenging in itself. I'm an organic beekeeper, so I don't use the usual methods that most beekeepers use. But I have a lot of mortality. I lose probably at least half my hives every year.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah, there's a lot of, I'm sure you've heard about it in the news, but the bees there's a lot of different diseases that are attacking the bees these days.
Okay. Yeah, I have heard about that. I didn't realize
Mhm.
quite how bad it was.
Yeah, yeah, it's it is quite different. A lot of beekeepers in the past, hives would last multiple years, and the queens would be very strong, and they would lay lots of eggs, and the hives you wouldn't have to manage them too much. But these days, a lot of beekeepers, or most beekeepers, have gone to an annual. They're treating their hives like an annual product. So each year they're starting out with new hives and then harvesting in the summer, and then starting all over in the spring with new hives, because it's so hard to keep them alive over the winter.
Huh.
So it is changing with the environment, of course,
Sure.
as the environment changes. So I'm not at my apiaries right now. I have a couple of apiaries in Carmel Valley. This is a little structure that I removed for someone out of their yard, and the bees are living in here. So I thought I would just sit here so you guys could kind of look at the bees, but
Yeah,
it's not a hive. I don't harvest honey from here. I just let the bees live in here because they seem to be pretty friendly.
they seem to be friendly and happy. What? Yeah, we can see them flying around for sure. Now, do different hives have different personalities? I've heard that as well, that some can be more aggressive than others and stuff like and whatnot. Is that?
Yeah. The wild hives are generally more aggressive. Pretty much all the bees that I deal with when I'm doing removals, they're usually wild bees. They're domesticated bees, but they've been living in the wild for a while, so their demeanor does change a lot sometimes. Sometimes they're pretty aggressive. Sometimes you have to wonder if they've been crossed with African bees because they're so aggressive. But
Oh wow.
But I don't think that's happened in a while in this area.
Okay. Good deal. So your customers, both for the honey and for the removal, what do you think they would say they like best about the service that you provide?
Well, people are always very happy to have the bees removed from their house. It can be really problematic, and a lot of people are very sensitive to bees, and they get very emotional about bees. So it does feel good. It's a good business to be in, because people are always very happy when I'm done.
Sure.
It is very challenging, though, to remove the bees from buildings, and it does get expensive, and not a lot of people can afford to do it. So it's kind of hit or miss. I get a lot of phone calls in the summertime. In the spring, I get like 5 or 6 calls a day, probably sometimes.
Oh wow.
When bees are swarming and moving around, people call. I used to pick up swarms for people, but I don't really do that anymore, because there's a bee club in Monterey, and they have a lot of members who will go out and pick up swarms for people for free. And that's called the Anarchist Bee Club. They're a bunch of beekeepers. They live here in Monterey County, and they go out and they pick up swarms for people.
Okay.
And they get together and they have monthly meetings. So if there's any people that are interested in beekeeping, that's a good resource.
Okay. Good to know.
Of course, I don't know what's happening as far as meeting right now with COVID and everything, what they're doing, but I'm sure they have some online stuff going on.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I'm sure they've got something going on, and you can
They have
always.
a good website. Yeah.
I was going to say you can probably reach out through their website to ask questions too if you have questions as well. So, so I'll find their website, and I'll post a link to it in the show notes here so people can find that.
Great.
Awesome. Well, one last question. What is your favorite part of being a member of the Monterey community?
Oh, that's a good question. There's so many amazing things about it. Oh, it's just such a wonderful community. I've lived in Monterey since 1987. So I've been here for quite a while. It's just a real nice, pleasant place to live, great place to raise a family. People are friendly.
Yeah. That's
great weather.
Yeah, it is. It's good weather. We love the community as well. That's why we stayed. We were supposed to be here for 6 months, and it's been 6 years now. So
yeah. Well, it has its challenges, certainly living here,
Oh, sure.
With expenses and stuff, but cost of living's high, but it's worth it, really.
Yeah, it makes up for it.
Well, great talking to you. Have a great trip.
Yeah, thanks so much, and we'll have a good time. We'll talk to you later. Thanks for watching, everybody. Be sure to check out the other interviews and subscribe to the channel.